All right, are we live? Let's see here. It doesn't look like it just yet. It might take a moment. Oh, would you look at that?
What's that?
It's up. I think it's up. Let's get some thumbs up in the chat if you guys can hear us. Let us know that we're doing all right. It's happening, someone says. Okay. Are we rolling, folks? Can you hear both of us?
Yep. All right, cool. We're up. There's just a slight delay, but that's how it usually works on YouTube. So I think I'll just go ahead and get started. Sound good?
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. Okay, yep. So welcome everybody to IE's very first webinar. My name's Ian. I'm the Pennsylvania coordinator. For those of you who don't know me, I'm proud to introduce Alex. Alex has had a long career in educating conservative activists. He also has 16,000 followers on Twitter. So go ahead and give him a follow. We can drop the link later. You'll see on our IE Discord that server admin has set up a seminar chat channel. You guys can chat in the YouTube chat. That's fine. However, we will do a Q&A at the end. So if you would like your question answered, you need to @ me in the seminar chat channel on our Discord. You'll find it just above general chat right now. Yeah, you guys didn't come to hear me, so I'll go ahead and mute myself and give the floor to Alex.
Yeah, awesome. So my name's Alex, and I'm going to introduce myself real quick, though. I thank you for the introduction earlier. And so basically, first, let me tell you why you should listen to me. All right. Well, actually, first, let me tell you what we're going to talk about, which is messaging. I'll touch on that in a moment. But basically, I've worked for campaigns, grassroots organizations, and nonprofits. Most recently, I worked for the Leadership Institute, which is a conservative nonprofit based out of Arlington, Virginia, right there in Northern Virginia, close to D.C. And so my job was basically to organize conservative activists and train them. And here is a picture of me, a bit younger. My shirt was a little wrinkly, so not perfect optics. But I was, a picture of me when I was working with Campaign for Liberty, and I was testifying in front of the Michigan House for a resolution which actually passed. And so that was a successful example of grassroots lobbying. Other things I've done include defeating speech codes on college campuses, including Michigan State, Grand Valley State University, College of DuPage in Illinois, and elsewhere. So I have a long history of doing activism, various types of activism, grassroots, campus, pro-free speech, anti-government surveillance, and that type of thing. And throughout 2016 and 2017, I was red-pilled. I kind of let people know more than I should have probably, and then I got canned for being too right-wing. So anyway, shoot me a follow on Twitter at Alex Wodosławski. People have told me I'm shadow banned, so you can go to twitter.com/Alex Wodosławski. On Discord, I'm Slavwave, so there's that. Anyway, so let's get into the meat of this lecture. So, before I do that, recommended trainings. Go to anything by the Leadership Institute, my former employer, leadershipinstitute.org. Another good organization is a Foundation for Applied Conservative Leadership, also called FACL for short. They have a good one-day school. Now, Leadership Institute trainings are good for tactics, right? So if you want to learn how to design a flyer or how to recruit new people or how to organize a protest or so on and so forth, Leadership Institute will teach you how to do a good job of doing that, right? Now, if you want to learn more of like a strategic angle on grassroots lobbying or grassroots organizing and the type of thing that organizations like Identity Evropa should be doing, I recommend the Foundation for Applied Conservative Leadership's one-day school. They'll teach you a lot of things about how to do things, like behind the scenes, how to organize, how to put pressure on elected officials, like we're seeing with this Stop the Caravan thing, like we're seeing with the whole Syria thing, you know, people calling into the White House. All of that stuff is excellent. FACL will teach you how to do that better. And the cool thing about FACL is you go to their one-day school, you can learn how to do this, you know, to your city council or to your state house, your state senate, or, you know, you'll learn how to do it locally. And there's always good, for example, there's a lot of actually immigration issues that people don't realize on the state level and sometimes even the local level. So anyway, just wanted to throw that out there. You know, start learning more and start infiltrating these various conservative organizations. Oh, and by the way, when you go to these trainings, don't go out there saying any like hardcore right-wing stuff. You know, you don't want to get kicked out or singled out to like be blacklisted or whatever, right? So just play it like you're a normal conservative. Anyway, so what we're going to learn today. So I was thinking about this, and I want to keep this as short and simple as possible. And so I'm not going to give you a debate class. I'm not going to give you an exhaustive list of persuasion or debate tactics. What I want to teach you today is a simple tool to help you stay on message. Okay. Now, this is very important. And, you know, if I were to go into exhaustive list of persuasion tactics or debate tactics, you know, like these are things you can read online oftentimes and learn. What I'm about to show you here, I don't believe you can find anywhere online, at least not a good explanation of it. Now, persuasion tactics are things like social proof, right? Social proof is something that Donald Trump uses a lot. He'll say, you know, everyone agrees that X, Y, and Z, right? Or debate tactics, or maybe like a closing tactic from sale is like a sharp angle close. Someone gives you a reason for whatever they think, and you use that reason for why they should think the opposite thing, right? This is exactly why you should buy. Now, I'm not going to go into all of that today because then this would be, you know, at least like a 2-hour lecture. I'm going to try to keep it under 45 minutes just so I can teach you this one tool to help you stay on message. Now, the goal is what do you want people to think of when they think of you? Okay. Your goal is to control that. Okay. You want to control what they think of when they think of you. You don't want the opposition to control it. You don't want the mainstream media to control it. Of course, that's kind of repeating myself because they are the opposition in many ways. You want to control what people think of when they think of you. So do you want them to think of this when they think of IE, or when they think of identitarians, or when they think of you know, right-wing nationalists, right? So here on the right, we obviously have an image from Identity Evropa's website. And this is also in various media articles and so on and so forth. And on the left, you know, I assume we can talk about this, you know, Douglas Mackey, aka Ricky Vaughn, got doxxed. That's his photo from HuffPo, right? And I'm actually going to touch on the whole Ricky Vaughn thing later because I think it's, I'll tie it in with the lecture. There's actually a silver lining to this dox. But is this what we want our image to be? Okay, I see a bunch of people dressed nicely. They're looking sharp. They look, you know, reasonably fit. Or do we want this to be the image that people think of when they think of right-wing nationalism, when they think of right-wing populism, identitarianism, and so on, right? Here we have, on the left-hand side, pretty chubby little guy. You know, nothing wrong with that. We're not all extremely fit, but he's, you know, unkempt, unclean. He's throwing a Roman salute. He was yelling racial slurs and swearing to the media. The Detroit Free Press actually published stuff about it. And then here on the other side, we've got a guy wearing an armband. He's got neck tattoos. He's even got hand tattoos. He looks like a guy like, you know, if you're a girl, you wouldn't want to date him. And if you did, because you have a thing for bad boys or whatever, you wouldn't want to like take him home to mom, right? Or to dad, because dad would be pretty fucking pissed off. So these like, so what's our image here? Do we want to be this? or do we want to be this? And one more point, we hear a lot of these people who argue that we need to be as hardcore as possible, you know, throwing Roman salutes or whatever. Like, oftentimes they come from kind of a left-wing background, and they like to tell you, oh, you need to read Rules for Radicals by Saul Alinsky. Well, I'm here to tell you that a lot of those people are full of shit, and they don't know what they're talking about, because this is what Saul Alinsky actually wrote in Rules for Radicals. Quote, true revolutionaries do not flaunt their radicalism. They cut their hair, put on suits, and infiltrate the system from within, end quote. He also, I believe it was in the preface to the last edition, Saul Alinsky wrote that young radicals of his time, which was the 1960s, that the young radicals of his time were making a mistake by attacking the American flag, that had they understood the first rule of communication, the basics of communication, they would understand to communicate to the American public that it is the establishment that spits on the American flag and betrays the American flag, and it's not the young radicals who do so. So just throwing that out there real quick. Now, I want to make this clear, though. This isn't about optics, right? The dreaded optics debate is stupid, in my opinion, because it's not about what color shirt you wear at a rally or whether or not you have red New Balance shoes, right? It's about the themes and the messages that you convey to outside observers, right? And this applies to your real world and your online presence, right? So it's not just what you wear, what color shirt you wear, it's your actions, it's your words, it's your message, it's the theme that people kind of subconsciously will derive from what you do. Okay, guys, so let's do a quick experiment. Whatever you do, don't think of an elephant. Now, what's the first thing you thought of when I said that? Of course, you thought of an elephant, all right? It's unavoidable. And this is exactly what it sounds like when you're saying, well, we're not Nazis, but, or we're not racists, but, or we're not anti-Semitic, but, we're not sexist, but, we're not homophobic, but, etc., 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 right? Now, the point of this messaging lecture is to show you a way to deal with hostile questions or accusations without saying, we're not Nazis, okay? Because the moment you say, we're not Nazis, let's say at this upcoming rally in DC, right? Washington Post walks up to Patrick Casey and asks, why are you Nazis? And Patrick Casey says, well, we're not Nazis, but, well, guess what the Washington Post will run with the next day? They're going to say, Identity Evropa leader, we're not Nazis. And that's going to be the topic of the media report, right? It's going to be whether or not we're Nazis. And that's not a conversation we want to have. We want to have the conversation about our issues and our topics, not whether or not we're National Socialists, right? We want to have a discussion about things like immigration, pro-white policies, multiculturalism, etc., etc. Now, this tool I'm going to show you is called the Leesburg Grid. And the Leesburg Grid, essentially, the way it works here, hold on a second. In the top left corner, well, first you're going to draw a square and divide it into 4 smaller squares, right? On the left-hand, top left side, you're going to have us on us. That's how you describe yourself. That's how you define yourself. In the top right-hand corner is us on them. That's how you describe the opposition, okay? On the bottom left-hand corner is them on us. That's how the opposition describes us. And on the bottom right-hand corner is them on them. And that's how the opposition describes themselves. Now, I'm going to go into the Leesburg Grid to kind of give you an idea of what our Leesburg Grid could look like. Now, I want to make a point here first, though. In real life, say you're working on a campaign and you're doing a Leesburg Grid for a candidate, what you would do is actually take 4 of those like giant Post-it notes that you can usually buy at like a CVS or something, or maybe a Walmart, and you put one on each wall. in a room, right? So you have 4. One would be us on us, one would be us on them, one would be them on us, and one would be them on them. And then you would start writing down everything you can think of, and from there you would narrow it down, okay? So we're not going to do this, obviously, for the sake of time. Also, the platform I'm using here, Google Hangout and YouTube Live, doesn't allow for timely interaction. Otherwise, I would say we should do this interactively, and it would be much better. And I think it would work better for you to learn. Now, that said, I actually have 2 videos from my former employer up on my YouTube channel that discuss political messaging and the Leesburg Grid. Altogether, they're 2 hours long. So if you want to spend 2 hours learning messaging in the Leesburg Grid, you can go to my channel and find those videos after we're done with this webinar. But okay, going forward. So this is the Leesburg Grid. Us on them on us, and them on them. Now, let's start filling this out. So first, we have to define ourselves, okay? Now, notice here what I put down. Let's first cover funny, clever, smart, intelligent, strong, tough, successful, normal, sensible, honest. Now, notice none of these things are actually issues, okay? They're only very tangentially associated with issues, okay? We're funny, we have funny memes. We're clever, we have clever memes, right? We're smart and intelligent. We can actually discuss things like philosophy. We're strong and we're tough. When it comes to like the Battle of Berkeley, you know, our former leader didn't mind punching Goldilocks, who was throwing M80s, right? We're successful, okay? We wear suits to conferences, and we dress nicely in rallies. And that goes along with being normal, and we're sensible, and we're honest, right? We actually discuss the issues at hand honestly. And derived from those bigger themes that focus on how we look and how we present ourselves and how we argue, etc. Based off of those things, we come a little closer to issues. Things like being nationalist or ethno-pluralist, identitarian, we're patriotic, we're traditionalist, we're cohesive, unified, and pro-white. So, for example, we want social cohesion and a unified society, right? And I'll explain here in a few minutes why that's actually important. Now, us on them. So how do we describe our opposition? Well, they're dishonest, they're liars, they're crony, they're corrupt, they're anti-white, so they're hateful. They're sick and disgusting, they're hypocritical, they're dumb, and oftentimes they're weak and or fat soy boys, right? So let me explain this here. Dishonest liars. Let's take what's happening in Syria right now as an example, right? The attack there in Syria, we have no confirmation of it. The last attack that happened a year ago in Syria, General Mattis ended up coming out and saying, well, actually, we don't know if Assad gassed them, right? So can we really believe this gas attack? Or let's take another example, right? They say diversity is good. We need more of these immigrants. And oftentimes you'll see organizations like the Cato Institute, or you'll see the New York Times in their editorials argue that immigrants commit less crimes. But if we look at crime statistics, we see that Hispanics commit more crimes than white Americans. So doesn't that show that a lot, half of our immigrants, or more than half of our immigrants, come from Latin America? They're Hispanic. Doesn't that show that immigration is actually increasing crime? So they're liars, right? And they're crony and they're corrupt. So, for example, a lot of these politicians that vote for open borders, okay, they're corrupt. They're, on the payroll of the Koch brothers, of Sheldon Adelson, of Paul Singer, et cetera, these major, GOP donors, at least, on what some people consider our side. A lot of these Republicans, these establishment Republicans, they're really just sellouts. They're crony, they're corrupt, They've sold out to big business that wants open borders. They've sold out to the Zionist lobby when it comes to foreign policy, right? That's why we're always waging these stupid wars. Anti-white, I mean, I think you guys get that. Sick and disgusting, like who wants trannies in girls' bathrooms, right? That's really sick and disgusting. There's no way that's not going to lead to, more rapes when we have trannies in girls' locker rooms. And in addition to that, another sick and disgusting thing is, what is it that, God, I can't remember the former senator from New Jersey. It was Barney Frank or something like that. When when Trump said he was disgusting and he had his nipples protruding from beneath his shirt, right? Like that's the visual imagery we want to evoke in people's head. They're hypocritical, so they're okay with Israel having a wall, but not with America having a wall. They're okay with Israel having closed borders, but America needs open borders and the rest of the West needs open borders, right? And so on and so forth. You can also call them dumb, though I prefer the dishonest liar narrative. And, but a lot of these, like the college kids and the Antifas, they're dumb. And they're weak, fat soy boys, right? So that's how we can define them. Now, how do we think the other side defines us? They call us losers, incels, spurgs, dumb and or stupid, racist Nazis, anti-Semites, white supremacists, hateful, bigoted, disunited, and they'll often point out infighting in order to, justify this. And we're totalitarian or authoritarian, right? So, for example, the losers, incels, spurgs, Nazis, so on, and the hateful, they'll often point out, groups that, march around with swastikas or whatever, and point out some of these guys, and they don't look like the brightest light bulbs. They don't look like winners in life, right? And yeah, a lot of these guys are working class, but the way they carry themselves in public isn't like a normal working class person does. I mean, I live here in a neighborhood of Metro Detroit. I live literally 5 minutes away from Ford plant, right? That builds cars. And, this isn't how normal working class people carry themselves. Disunited and infighting, right? They love to point out all the infighting. And this is also kind of why we have to show that we're cohesive and unified and try to be above that in public, right? It's one thing to, discuss things in private. And totalitarian, authoritarian. Now, something I should have put in us on us is we want freedom for our people, right? Self-determination. Now, them on them. They'll say they're tolerant, they're diverse, they're humane, they're liberal, they're progressive. This is how the opposition defines themselves, right? Now that we have this whole Leesburg grid, we can actually discuss some of the intricacies here of the message, right? So, for example, they say they want a diverse, tolerant society. Now, this is actually where we can point out that, well, we want a strong, cohesive, and unified society, okay? Because that's the opposite. Instead of saying, oh, we hate diversity, we can say we want a unified, cohesive society, right? It's saying the same thing. Saying diversity is bad. But instead of saying, talking about diversity, which puts you on the bottom of the Leesburg grid, you're in their zone when you're talking about diversity. You can stay on top. You can stay on message when you're talking about social cohesion, right? When you have a more homogeneous society, your society is more cohesive. Also, when it comes to humane, you can talk about how they're hypocritical, right? Or when it comes to tolerance, how they're hypocritical, right? they want a tolerant society. Well, why are they shutting down legitimate political opinions on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, et cetera, et cetera? Why do they support the punch a Nazi meme, right? I mean, A, they mislabel people as Nazis, but B, why do they support punching people for their political views, regardless of what those views are? That's not very humane or tolerant or liberal, for that matter. So now you can kind of get a sense of how this messaging works, right? Okay, now let me tie this in with why I think the alt-right was initially successful, right? So up until Charlottesville, the media, essentially, the mainstream media, and oftentimes like the left-wing media as well, they were freaking out about the alt-right. And they weren't really thinking about it too rationally, right? And so they were forced to describe the alt-right in a way that would have fit in the us corner of the Leesburg grid. They would often talk about, oh, you know, the alt-right, they have funny, clever memes. They're smart and really good at using the internet. They're successful. Their movement's growing. You know, look at these alt-right guys in three-piece suits, right? Or look at these guys showing up in polos and khakis. They don't look like the dregs of society. They look like good, normal people, right? Now, of course, they would also say, "Oh, these are evil, racist, white supremacists," but they actually did our job for us, right? We're funny, clever, smart, good at the internet. You know, we got funny memes. Really good at trolling these shit libs on Twitter, right? Now, after Charlottesville, the media narrative changed significantly. And that's when you notice like the alt-right started doing much worse. And the media focused on the worst pictures they could find in Charlottesville and in Shelbyville and these other rallies. And all of a sudden, instead of being funny, clever, smart, and good at the internet, the alt-right became evil, racist Nazi Klansmen who were fat, stupid, bigoted, and hateful, murderous terrorists. Now, of course, this isn't exactly accurate because, you know, we all know what happened in Charlottesville. That was not an act of terrorism or intentional murder. And we know that they focused on, you know, maybe a few people within a rally of a couple thousand. And they used those few people to paint everyone as like evil, fat, stupid, bigoted Nazis, right? And that just simply wasn't really accurate, but they had the pictures. The messaging wasn't controlled at the Unite the Right Charlottesville rally, and they shifted the narrative. And that's when the media's assaults on the alt-right started becoming much more successful. And that was essentially because they moved their messaging from the top of our Leesburg grid, where we want it to be, to the bottom where they want it to be. All right, and so why was the alt-right successful? Part two. Oh, actually, I forgot to mention here one last thing. So actually, we saw a good example of the media messing up their messaging with the unveiling of Ricky Vaughn, aka Douglas Mackey. Because in that article, right, what do you see there? You see a guy that went to Middlebury College, from, you know, definitely an upper middle class, if not an upper class family. All the pictures of him, he seems like a normal white guy, right? He went to college, he's out there partying with some people or whatever, but, you know, he looked fine in those pictures. Then they show him with a nice shirt and tie, right? They say he was a successful consultant, right? And reading that, you know, a lot of people reading that HuffPo article, you know, we're probably thinking, wow, how did such a smart, well put together guy end up having all of these evil, racist ideas, right? And so inevitably, HuffPo actually kind of helped the, you know, the populist right wing when they unveiled Ricky Vaughn. Even though, you know, obviously that sucks for Ricky Vaughn, and I hope he, you know, figures out how to get his life on track, because I'm sure he's probably fired and everything, and maybe he has like protesters on his front lawn or something, who knows. But HuffPo inadvertently kind of helped the alt-right, with the article because they normalized it, right? Instead of focusing at the guys at Michigan State, they focus on people in the alt-right who are just normal white guys, right? Who looked around the world and figured out something was going wrong. And so, yeah, so this was actually something that was good in the Leesburg Grid. Now, why was the alt-right successful? Part two. And this also relates to the Leesburg Grid. So there were certain cultural norms and social norms within the alt-right that helped it be successful in 2016 and the first part of 2017. One of them was don't punch right, okay? And the reason this worked, now there's a downside to this that I'll discuss in a minute, but the upside to not punching right is that people weren't stuck in the bottom two grids of the Leesburg Grid, right? So if you're constantly saying, no, I'm not a Nazi, you're basically saying, don't think of an elephant. What do you think of? An elephant. Instead of, constantly counter-signaling and punching right, people were instead focused on defining themselves and their own views and defining the opposition, okay? And so in doing so, they were more successful. They stayed in the top two grids, top two squares of the Leesburg Grid, defining themselves and defining the opposition. They weren't letting themselves be defined. They weren't constantly counter-signaling and punching. Now, simultaneously, don't punch right actually hurt a little bit. And so I say this because I think organizations like TWP and NSM, they were tolerated and invited to rallies, events. And this really put us in the bottom two grids, bottom two squares of the Leesburg Grid, right? All of a sudden, they could paint us as losers, as hateful bigots, and all of this because we weren't in control of our messaging, right? And dispersed, et cetera, et cetera. And the other thing was the whole don't punch right kind of allowed a lot of people in the alt-right to have this excessive fixation on historical revisionism, which really pigeonholed people in the bottom two squares of the Leesburg Grid. Okay, so for example, World War II revisionism, right? There's some World War II revisionists, they disagree on how many people died in the Holocaust or whatever. And no matter what, if you're arguing about the Holocaust, you're losing, okay? Because as soon as you do it, you're basically saying, well, I'm not a Nazi, but, well, as soon as you say that, what do people think? Think of Nazis. They think you're a Nazi if you start denying it, right? And if you start arguing about the Holocaust, you're basically a Hitler apologist, and then all of a sudden the discussion isn't about what you want in the future, how are you going to achieve your goals in a humane way, right? The discussion is about history, so you're not really advancing your agenda, right? And whether or not you're a Nazi. And so that's when you're discussing this issue, this World War II revisionism, you're putting yourself in the bottom two squares of the Leesburg Grid. You're essentially allowing the opposition to define you, and you're encouraging it, right? Instead of staying in the top two grids. Now, let's move on here to staying on message. So I kind of gave here a brief, introduction to the Leesburg Grid. Now, staying on message, when someone asks you a hostile question or makes a hostile accusation, first of all, if you're at a IE rally or something, I believe IE has like designated press people. So if the media or if someone tries to interview you, you should, point the media towards the designated press person. Now, that said, in private interactions or if you're doing something locally on your state level or whatever, and you decide to engage with someone who has questions, you should always answer the question you wish you were asked. Okay, you'll see politicians doing this a lot, at least the better politicians, if you observe them closely. And essentially what you want to do is you want to deflect or bridge and transition away from the hostile question and then answer the question that you wish you were asked. So for example, someone asks, why are you a Nazi? Or why do you hate black people? Or why do you hate Jews, right? Jordan Peterson or something. he might ask you, like, why do you have this irrational hatred of Jews? Like, are you a loser in life or something? And that's why you decide to blame some outside group of people. Well, you don't want to. Hold on a second. You don't want to. Hold on, guys. I just got a salesperson, I think. All right. Well, sorry about that. You don't want to get pigeonholed into that discussion. Instead, you want to bridge a way to a talking point that puts you in the top 2 squares of the Leesburg grid. So when someone asks this, you say, look, the real issue is X, Y, and Z. Or when someone says, why do you hate black people? You should say, when I speak to people, the issue isn't about hatefulness or bigotry. Instead, it's about creating a more cohesive society, etc. Now, I'm going to step away from the computer real quick to answer the door. Extremely sorry about this, guys. But in the meantime, feel free to send your questions forward, and then I'll announce when I'm back and we can discuss this.
Okay, guys. So are there any, wow, drifting into infinity. Are there any audio issues going on right now? Can everybody hear everything okay? Is there anything that we can address at the moment that we wouldn't be able to otherwise without interrupting? Because this is a perfect opportunity to do that. Was his red pill? Good question. I'll ask him that. Patient Zero, I don't know if you saw my message earlier. Do you think you could send me your notes so I can compare them and then have something a little more comprehensive to send through? Everything's fine on technical end? Awesome. Audio quality is great. Good to hear. Yeah, I'm looking at like 3 different chats at once. I'll show you. No, at the end, Patient Zero. I'll show you what my screen looks like here. Looks like he might be back.
All right, yeah. You guys hear me?
Yep, and I just confirmed that the audio was perfect so far and the video was perfect so far. So I'll mute up again and we can get started once more.
Yeah, sorry about that. I kind of feel like I botched the end there because kept on getting knocking at my front door and it was distracting me. So, but yeah, do we have any questions or anyone want any clarifications?
Only questions that came through were questions at the end.
Okay. Let's hear him.
Oh, are you done?
Yeah. So the last part was just staying on message here. So when we're on the Leesburg grid, how do you transition away from the messaging? Or right. So when people ask you a hostile question, you say, "Look, the real issue is," and you go back to the top of the Leesburg grid, where you talk about your issues, right? Instead of letting them control the conversation and the messaging. Or when we say, when people say, why do you hate X group of people or whatever, you say, when I speak to people, the issue isn't hate or bigotry. It's about how do we create a more cohesive society where everyone feels at home, or something along those lines, where you essentially transition away from their talking point, you acknowledge it, you block in your bridge, and you move to your talking point, right? So we can actually go back here to the Leesburg grid and see how if someone asks us, oh, why is there so much infighting in your movement or whatever, you can essentially block and bridge to the top of the Leesburg grid where you start talking about, well, actually that's not really the issue. The issue is the other side. They're dishonest. You're lying about us, etc. So, yeah.
All right. Yeah. Fantastic. So we have some questions coming in now. So
Okay.
I will go ahead and get started with a really basic one. This one's from Patient Zero. And he just wanted to know, how did you get red pilled? What's your very brief red pill story?
Yeah, so my brief red pill story, I guess, is that like many people, I was like a Ron Paul libertarian, back in '08 and 2012. And I was well aware of several issues. I was definitely a right-wing libertarian in terms of my understanding of the Zionist lobby and our foreign policy as well. I was actually one of these like libertarian race realists, right? Where I was kind of like an individualist, but I understood there was differences between groups, and that in a free society, these differences would be larger, and that'd be okay, right? I was okay with that. And so I did have these ideas, but at the same time, uh, I'm actually a dual citizen with Poland and the U.S. And I've always been somewhat of a Polish nationalist, right? But I had this silly idea of America just being like the land of immigrants or whatever. And so when Trump ran, and I started interacting with a lot of like populist nationalists, and I was okay with that because I was like, look, these people, they're not interventionists. Uh, Maybe I don't agree with them on everything, but I definitely agree, like, we need to end all of these Zionist wars overseas. And so, I started interacting with, these more like right-wing, alt-right identitarians and so on and so forth. And gradually I realized, like, the view that I held, which was that, Poland is a country for Polish people, while America is just like an international shopping mall for anyone, that was incompatible, right? Like every country kind of has a core national group with a national identity that it should be representing and protecting. And for America, that's Americans, which is, the kind of amalgamation, I guess would be the right word, maybe, of different European groups, mainly Anglo-Saxon, but other European groups as well that came here, settled this country, conquered it, right, and built it up. And so that was kind of a gradual red pilling for me. Honestly, like, I don't think I got fully red pilled until 2017. But yeah, so I guess that's my red pill story in short. So.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for that answer. Very in-depth. So we got some good questions coming in now at this point. Eric Younger from Colorado asks, who are some examples of conservative personalities that you find that tend to stay on message very well?
One that I can think of is Ann Coulter. So she stays on message pretty well, where, like, and she lets the, she lets like the attacks kind of flow off of her back like water off of a duck's back, right? Like they don't stick to her, right? So she stays on message pretty well. I think Tucker Carlson does a pretty good job where, like, instead of talking about, oh, how we're not X, Y, or Z or whatever, instead of, falling at the bottom of the Leesburg grid, he stays on top and is always kind of on the attack, right? Always defining the enemy, right? And defining his own views. Now, there's some other people that are good, but they have other flaws, I think, that, specifically politicians, that I think kind of hurts them. So, Ted Cruz is good on messaging. I'd say he's, pretty skilled, but he is, overall, he's kind of too dorky, right? Because this guy's a lawyer, and he tries to, that's not what the right-wing base likes. That's why I don't think he ever really had a chance, because he isn't like a big, strong personality like Donald Trump is, right? So he never really stood a chance, but he's pretty good with messaging, but he's too smart almost for his own good. He likes to show off his high IQ. So he has that issue. Rand Paul can stick to his messaging pretty well, and you'll see it when people ask him, when like media and whatnot ask him hostile questions. He's usually pretty good at going back on top of the Leesburg grid and sticking to the message he wants to drive home. But again, like, I don't agree with Ron Paul on everything, and I think sometimes you know, like the content of his message isn't good, because like he'll go to a black college and talk about criminal justice reform, whereas, you know, I think we need cops, you know, cracking down on criminals in the streets. Like, yeah, but he's good at messaging, right? And staying on message. The content of his message isn't great though. But yeah, I mean, I think those are some good examples. Now, if I were to give you some like bad examples, Governor Scott Walker of Wisconsin is pretty bad. I mean, in addition to being an extremely boring person, I think he's dumber than a sack of potatoes, to be honest with you. He's like clearly one of these empty suits that the GOP establishment puts up. And I mean, he's been good for like some, you know, conservative issues, I guess, when it comes to like economics and whatnot in Wisconsin. And he deserves credit for like winning all the elections he's won up there. But, you know, he's really bad at messaging. During the debates, it came across pretty obviously that all he can do is deliver canned talking points, you know. And when he gets hit with a tough question, he doesn't know how to deal with it. And you'll notice these like empty suits that aren't very bright. They always have, you know, campaign managers and PR people all over them trying to block anyone from asking them an honest question that's not pre-prepared because they don't know how to deal with it. So, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, good answer. I especially agree with Coulter. Yeah,
I mean, she's awesome.
Guys, we can infiltrate institutions. I believe we can do it, especially if we exhibit that low time preference. A lot of the senators we have, a lot of the representatives we have, there are a couple very clever ones, but a lot of them aren't that smart. You could do a better job. A lot of you, probably half of you, could do a better job in office than a number of these senators and representatives that we have. So, Alex, I don't want to put the thumb screws on you too much. We have 7 really good questions, and you can take as long as you'd like, but I just want you to be aware that we have 7 questions. So if you give a good amount of time to every single one.
Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely. That's why in this first training, I wanted to keep it a little bit on the shorter side so I could answer more questions because, you know, hopefully this is going to be the first time I do something like this. And the next time we can cover other topics. But yeah, I'm fine with answering every single question.
No doubt, no doubt. I just wanted to sort of let you know what you were having come your way. So I'm going to take this one out of order because I think it's a very good question and sort of ties in what we were talking about just now. So this is a quote from Patrick, and you've basically been asked to critique it. Patrick says, quote, "We are not supremacists because we do not believe that white people should rule over non-white people. We are ethno-pluralists. We believe that all ethnic and racial groups should have somewhere in the world to call home." See what Patrick Casey said in an email. And the commenter, which was Jacob, says, "I know you said not to say we are not supremacists. So in your opinion, is this a good quote or would you have said it differently?"
Well, you guys are already asking me to to critique the leader of IE. Well, you know, I'd say, first of all, sometimes, you know, it's tricky because sometimes you do have to deal with these questions in a way that answers it, right? Now, if that was said to like a media person or something, asked Patrick that, I would recommend not to say we're not whatever, right? Instead of saying, well, you know, if it says, someone says, "Patrick Casey, why are you a white supremacist?" Right? Someone walks up to you, the person listening to this, you know, so-and-so, why are you a white supremacist? You say, well, you know, this really isn't an issue about bigotry or whatever. What we're really talking about is nationalism and ethno-pluralism, giving everyone the right, every people a right to self-determination, et cetera, right? So you want to, as much as possible, say, you don't want to say, "I'm not this," right? You can kind of play it off as, here, let's go forward. You can play it off by saying, you know, when I speak to people, the issue isn't about supremacy, right? It's actually about, you know, nationalism, or it's actually about self-determination. It's actually about creating a strong, cohesive society. And that's kind of like a weak way of saying don't think of an elephant, except you're not exactly saying that. And if you say this to a media person, they won't be able to quote it easily and take it out of context, right? I mean, they might do that anyway, but at least you'd be in the right in this case. Or you could just completely ignore that issue and say, look, the real issue is, so why are you a white supremacist? You can be like, what? Look, the real issue is building a society that's cohesive, building a society where every people has a right to self-determination, right? Where you completely blow it off. You treat it as a ridiculous question because it is a ridiculous question, right? As Patrick Casey said in that answer, we don't want to rule over other people, right? That's not the goal. So instead you, boom, just transition immediately into what you want to talk about. So, yeah, I think that answers the question.
Yeah, fantastic. And I'm already seeing some of the chat here in Discord they're already picking up on a lot of what you said, which is fantastic. It means this is all worthwhile. So the Eternal Angler from Florida asks,
great username.
You like that name?
Yeah.
You're predominantly Polish, are you, with that last name?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, makes a little sense now. What would you say that we could do better to teach/convert people into identitarianism in private? Well, that sentence doesn't make a lot of sense. Hang on, let me read that again. And do our best to keep a good image in the news.
Yeah, well, so I think, well, I like, the reason why I joined IE, and, you know, I told this in my interviews and whatnot, is I like what IE is doing. I think it's generally doing a good job in terms of like the flash mobs and the type of controlled activism where the message is extremely controlled, right? Instead of having these large public events where anyone can show up, including opposition, and try to mess with you, right? So I think that is much, much better than doing the sorry, I lost my train of thought there. But essentially, I think IE is already doing a good job now with the private rallies and that type of thing, banner drops, et cetera, et cetera. Now, what can, there's some things that could be improved there, but, you know, I think, you know, you're building up. So, like, that, it's fine, like, it's going to come. Now, privately, what can be done better? I'd say, you know, just honestly, like, staying on message. You know, I know some people, like, personally who are like big history buffs or whatever, which is fine. But then they like to discuss these issues that I think is a no-no, right? So just stay on message, talk about ethno-pluralism and self-determination. Now, doing a better job selling what you believe in, I think, you know, you have to speak responsibly, treat people well. And then, you know, in the future, maybe we'll discuss this more like using persuasion tactics, right? So, for example, like the social proof that I mentioned. Oh, everyone thinks this, right? Or everyone agrees that X, Y, and Z. So social proof, some salespeople call that the Jones effect. So you can use that. Or, you know, Trump used this as well, like I mentioned, like, you know, everyone agrees that we're spending too much in the Middle East or whatever, right? So he would use that social proof, that Jones effect, to kind of bolster his point. But, you know, the topic of persuasion kind of on a one-on-one setting was beyond the scope of this one webinar, simply because that would be a whole another, you know, easily another 45 minutes to an hour, I think, of just talking about persuasion. One more thing I'll mention in terms of that is framing. How you frame an issue is extremely important. Like, for example, the Democrats are better at messaging, period, much better than Republicans are. I think it's because they're more radical in their worldview. So they actually think these things through, whereas conservatives, by their nature, they don't want any revolutionary change. They just, you know, most conservatives today, they just kind of want to keep things as they are, right? Maybe they want to mess with tax rates or whatever, but as a result, they don't give a great deal of thought into how they want to do politics because they just want to keep things the same. But when you want radical change, you'll think about these things more like, what do I have to do? How do I have to talk in order to create radical change? So anyway, I think the Democrats are, secretly they're much more further left than they let on. And as a result, they give more thought to this. And so, for example, instead of talking about oh, we want to raise taxes or whatever, they'll talk about things like tax fairness, right? Or it used to be people would talk about helping the poor or whatever. Well, now they talk about, helping women and children and working families, right? Because when you say, I want to help the poor, people think, oh, well, you want to just give away welfare to welfare bums, right? But when you say, I want to help women and children, and working families, that gives you a different mental image. That's an issue of framing, and you have to be careful. And it kind of fits in with this whole Leesburg grid thing, where you want to have frames that keep you in the top two, squares in the Leesburg grid, top two boxes. So you got to figure out a way, like if someone frames a question a certain way that's unfavorable to you, you have to figure out how to break that frame or change it. Now that's kind of a more complicated topic, I think, but yeah, that's my short answer for now.
Excellent. Yeah, and I absolutely agree with the left being better at messaging. I've had a long time to sort of couch their views in practice, but it's time for the real right to return, which is us. So before we get any deeper into further questions, I did have somebody ask about the Jones effect, and I kind of thought I knew what it was myself, but I wasn't positive, so I Googled it, and it's basically keeping up with the social capital of your peers, right?
Yeah. So Jones effect is essentially what sales guys say. Robert Cialdini, a doctor or professor of psychology, I believe, he called it social proof. It's essentially the same thing. So like a sales guy, when you're like going door to door selling stuff, right? Let's say you're selling TV and internet, right? Packages. So you say, well, actually, Mr. and Mrs. Jones down the street, they just got Comcast and they love it, right? And they saved 50% on their bill or whatever, right? So the Jones effect is essentially social proof. You're just saying, well, person X agrees with me, right? And it's even better, or you can use it like Trump, and Trump uses kind of it more generally, like, oh, everyone thinks this, right? Or many, many Americans think this, right? But you can also use it specifically, like if you can reference a person you can think of who is, normal, successful, and say, well, this person thinks X, Y, and Z. It kind of normalizes what you're saying, right? And it gives social proof. And it's not something that's really logical or rational if you think about it. Just because a person thinks something doesn't make it right. But that's how the human brain works. That's how social psychology works. Like someone you like thinks something, you're more likely to agree with that, right? So that's just the idea behind the Jones effect. It's the same as social proof. I recommend everyone look up Robert Cialdini, Principles of Persuasion, and he talks about social proof, consistency, and other aspects of persuasion. So
excellent. Yeah. That's sort of along the lines. Of course, you're much more skilled at this than I am. Sort of along the lines of what I thought, but it's good to clarify that as well. So
yeah, you got it right. You got it right. I just wanted to expound a little bit on it.
That you did. Guys in the chat, I've mixed up the order of the questions, so if yours doesn't get read right away, I'm just sort of trying to keep things on a similar topic. Server admin asked an interesting question. I'd say this probably falls in line with our general subject right now, which is framing. He says, doesn't it seem like if somebody is asked, are you X, and refuses to say no, then they actually are X and are trying to avoid saying so?
I mean, it can certainly seem like that, but I think you're okay, here's the thing is a lot of times people forget the question that you were asked, especially if like this is done publicly or something, right? Say you're doing a Q&A at a event with a public attendance or whatever, and someone asks you a question that you really, really don't want to answer. Well, if you're skilled at it, by the time you're finished answering the question you wish you were asked, no one's actually going to remember the real question you were asked, right? And so, but, and again, like, it's not just about what people dare think. It's like, okay, well, what if someone writes something up about this, right? What's going to go in tomorrow's newspaper? And I can always guarantee you, if you say, I'm not a white supremacist, in an answer, the next day, if someone writes up a piece about it, it's going to lead with, so-and-so says he's, quote, not a white supremacist, end quote, right? And that's what the story going to be. That's what the story is going to be about. And you don't want the story to be about that. You want the story to be about what you want to convey, not about their talking points. See what I'm saying? So you want to talk about, you could say, if you wanted to, if someone asks you a tough question, just be like, that's a ridiculous question. The real issue here is self-determination for all peoples, giving a homeland for all peoples, et cetera, et cetera. See, so you can like kind of brush off the question. You say it's ridiculous, right? But you don't directly answer it. You don't give a quote that can be quoted by people, right? So that's my recommendation generally for it, for that type of question.
Yep, seems like that came through loud and clear. You see the light bulb going off in his head now in chat. Okay, so I'm moving this one up to the front of the queue as well because it falls in line. This is from Greg in Texas. For internal use, however, that is decided. Do you think it would be beneficial to create a document listing the common verbal attacks, accusations, gotchas, and leftist talking points and have concise responses with IE's ideal talking points? Or do you think there's a better way to help train people on our talking points?
Yeah, no, I mean, that should be done. Like I said, like in a campaign or something, by the way, like not all politicians do this, certainly not on the right, which is, a big issue. So they don't do this, but people who are skilled professional, like I said earlier, what they'll do with like a Leesburg grid, they'll have 4 giant sheets of paper, tape one on each wall in the room and just start writing down. Someone will shout something out and you have a person with a marker writing down, okay, so what are our characteristics? Okay, my candidate is honest, or my organization, we're honest, right? We're funny, we're intelligent, we have good character. And like, you'll literally find like every single iteration or synonym to a word you've written down and write it down again, right? And so this is actually a process that campaigns do, and they have this written down, and then based on what they have written down, they'll go through and they'll train people in their talking points. They don't show you the Leesburg grid, most people, right? They do the Leesburg grid, and then they tell people, this is your talking point. If someone asks you this is what you should say. So because you want to dumb it down so the average person can get it and not spend 2 hours on a webinar or whatever trying to learn this thing, right? But yeah, so like a talking point document would be great. I would recommend like you and your state people or whatever, if you want to, I recommend you do a Leesburg grid. Figure it out, and each of you can like discuss this and figure out, okay, how do we want to define ourselves here in Pennsylvania, or here in Michigan, or here in Oregon, right? Like, how do you want to define yourselves? How do you define the enemy, the opposition? How do you define, or how will they define you? And what are your talking points, the messages, the themes you want to put forth that counter the messages and the themes that they're putting forth? And this is something that, yeah, should be done consciously. And then once you figure that out with, your main guys or whatever, you can write up, if you want to, write up a document with simple talking points that you spread with other people. And that'll be that. So, yeah. Did that make sense?
It made sense to me. It seems like...
Yeah, I think I rambled on a little bit there, but I'm saying, yeah, go make a document with talking points.
Yeah, I know something's being worked on a little bit in the background. I can't elaborate on that too much. So I guess we'll continue. We've got one or two more questions in the framing category, and then we'll talk about just a few other things. So Eric Younger, once again from Colorado, asks, what are some good ways to keep your message relevant and tailored to your audience?
Well, how to keep your message relevant. I mean, talk about relevant issues, right? And so this is actually kind of the point of doing the theme is, the reason we do themes is to figure out what issues you want to talk about. It's kind of like the reverse of what people think about, right? Because we have to realize that we, like everyone on this webinar right now, we're weird, right? Or a nicer way of saying that would be we're unique, right? We're special snowflakes. We actually care about issues and like research and thinking about things and reading philosophy and reading the news or whatever, right? That's not most people. So, in order to keep things relevant, you do the Leesburg grid, you figure out what your themes are, and then if there's an issue or so that matters locally, say, you can figure out how to frame the issue in order to make it fit into the general themes you want to express publicly, right? So, for example, actually, I can't really think of an example right now. I mean, crime or something like here in Detroit, like obviously Detroit has a massively disproportionate amount of crime. So like you would talk about being tough on crime, right? If someone asks you about that for some reason, and how does that fit into the Leesburg grid? Well, we want to present ourselves as tough, right? Like you can't mess with us or whatever. So likewise, when you're talking about an issue, you can talk about being strong and tough on crime and that type of thing. If you want to give me an example of an issue that you want to make relevant, but honestly, it matters because, like in an area with not many immigrants, I don't think you would necessarily talk much about the immigrant issue because it's not really on people's minds, unless it is. Your area better than I do, but maybe talk about some other issue that's affecting your area and show how multicultural, multiracial policies affect that. It kind of varies based on the issue and where you are. So, yeah.
Yep, cool. I couldn't agree more. Evan from Colorado asks us, can you give more examples of effectively avoiding questions, and then I suppose he means and then transitioning into the question that you would like to be asked?
Yeah, no, I mean, honestly, I just kind of come up with these like on the fly. This is one of the issues of like trying to teach something when you've done something way too many times. But yeah, the main thing is like the main transition phrases. I think you should just memorize is, look, the real issue is, or when I speak to people, the issue isn't X, it really is Y, right? Like you don't want to. There's not like a lot of transition phrases to memorize. If you want to think of more, be my guest. But my philosophy about most things is like keep it short and simple, right? That way you're more likely to remember it. So when someone attacks you, like, look, if you say, look, the real issue is 5 times to 5 different questions, most people won't even pick up on it, right? Because they're not paying that close of attention. Most people in the public at least won't pick up on it. So yeah, I mean, that's my recommendation. You just have to like realize, like, if you want to acknowledge the question, you can acknowledge it. That's when you say, when I speak to people, they don't talk about bigotry. What they really care about is whatever your talking point is. Now, if you don't want to acknowledge the question, you just brush it off. You deflect it. You essentially ignore it. You say, look, the real issue is, and you launch right into your talking point. That may or may not be really related to the question that you were asked. But yeah, I mean, there's not a whole lot of ways to do this with a hostile question. It's just to just brush it off and and move on. So.
Yep, that'll come with practice too. I know. Just sitting here and listening to you, Alex, I wanted to start doing workshops with the PA guys and some of the North Atlantic guys. We're all basically one large chapter anyways, functionally. Where we just basically do like a round table or a rapid fire where one person is getting asked questions and then our other members try to come up with the worst possible questions you can imagine being asked. And sort of drilling people on answering them appropriately. So I recommend other chapters do that as well. We've got a busy schedule this month, but we'll try to fit it in maybe next month. So Alabama Goy asks, how would you appeal to the religious right? I've been talking to some of my Christian friends about all of this. Many of them feel uncomfortable, as they've been taught thinking along racial or ethnic lines is somehow sinful.
Yeah, well, I would talk to, I'm not an extremely religious person myself. I think this is something you should talk to like a Christian alt-righter or a Christian identitarian or whatever. Talk to them and figure out what their arguments are. But I do actually agree with you, I think, kind of along the lines of what, Alinsky said, for example, about the American flag. We need to show more religious people why Christianity works with identitarianism, right? And, just like off the top of my head, I mean, you could bring up the Tower of Babel, the idea that they tried to bring all peoples, all cultures together, and they got, so full of themselves that they decided to build like the largest tower ever, and God struck it down. Like that's kind of an example of like being against multiculturalism. There's some other passages in the Bible. Again, I'm not well versed in the Bible or Christianity. I was raised Catholic, but so I would honestly recommend go talk to some Christian, some identitarian Christians out there who have better formed opinions on this. Maybe look up, Wife with a Purpose or the Godcast or whatever, submit a question to them about like, okay, give me the basics of this. Like, how do I fit these two things together? But, like for me, I mean, it's just all my arguments for this are relatively secular, but then again, like I don't live in a extremely Christian conservative area, but I do think, I do agree with the premise of the question, which is we need to do a better job of being inviting and welcoming to Christians and to the religious right. We need to show them how, I mean, because let's be honest, like those are mostly, like this is like 99% of them are white, right? And they're, they're already pro-life. A lot of them are anti-gay marriage and anti-degeneracy and stuff. They're our kind of our target audience. So we do have to figure out a better way to flip them on just a couple issues, right? Just on like the whole nationality and race thing. But, I think the identitarian movement in IE is better suited to do so because, we do recognize that all people have a right to self-determination. And so, that's something like that you can kind of fit in there with the universal message of Christianity. Like, maybe we're all equal in the eyes of God or whatever, but society works better when we live separately in our own nations and we all have the right to self-determination. I would try to finagle an argument, something like that, to Christians who bring that up. But I don't think those things are contradictory. I do think someone who is a practicing Christian can give you a better religious argument, though, that would be possibly more persuasive to a religious Christian. So,
yeah, it looks to me here that a couple people have posted a link from faithandheritage.com.
Oh, yeah.
Like Alabama Goy got that. There's also an Ameren article that Jacob posted. So it seems like Alabama Goy has some resources in the chat here. So I think question kind of answered itself, but I agree that's definitely definitely a demographic that we have to reach out to. I'm not particularly religious myself, but I have some of my best members are either Orthodox or Catholics. No offense to you, a few Protestants in here. So, guys, Musius Scavola asks, what's your best normie-friendly answer to the question, what is identitarianism?
Well, I mean, honestly, I don't talk about identitarianism much. I usually just talk about nationalism. But yeah, I mean, if someone were to ask me what identitarianism is, I'd say, you know, it's the idea that our identities matter, and it's the that our race, our ethnicity, our culture, and everything, like all those things are the basis of our identity, right? And you know, I would talk more about why that matters in society, right? Like we see in America now that we've become so quote unquote diverse racially and culturally and ethnically that our society isn't cohesive. We're all alienated, right? We have studies that back this up. You know, Robert Putnam and others have done studies that show that the diversity in our society actually destroy the cohesion, and everyone just wants to stay home and watch the TV, and they don't go to church, they don't go to social organizations, they don't help their neighbor, they litter, they're more likely to commit crimes, right? And it makes for a worse off society. So if you want to live in a society, you know, like maybe like we had in the 50s or the 60s where people are more friendly, right? Your neighbor's going to help you, where the schools are better. You want a society that's cohesive, that follows along, you know, kind of like ethnic identitarian lines. So that's how I would talk about it. I mean, that's how I generally talk about it. Instead, I usually just use the word nationalist because I think more people have like a frame of reference for what that means. But, you know, identitarianism's a great term, and I think one that's going to go mainstream within a few years. Like everyone's going to have an idea of what that is, right? So it's important for us to kind of define that early on. But yeah, I mean, you just talk about essentially what it is and why it matters. You don't have to like. I think the issue is, especially like online, you know, online where people hide behind anonymous profiles or whatever, and then we all congregate in forums with, you know, everyone has the same views on issues like ethnicity, race, and so on. We all kind of end up purity spiraling, you know what I mean? And everyone, like, once they live in these online interactions and they take it out and try to, you know, take it IRL, they immediately start with like, oh, let's kick the blacks out to Africa or whatever, right? Like, no, that's don't lead with that, right? Like, lead with like something more positive, right? Like, talk about like why we want a cohesive society and why that's beneficial. You want to sell someone on the benefits first, and you know, explain to them why things like ethnicity and race matter, and then, you know, and you can give them examples, right? Like, why is it in America, you know, we've had whites and blacks living side by side for so long and they've never integrated? Even now, after, you know, after slavery was banned, you know, like 150 years ago, after Jim Crow was ended and everything, decades later, there's still no integration. Race relations have worsened, right? Why is that? Maybe it's because we can't live together. We just have too many differences, and there's no way you can ignore them, right? And this is going to happen in every single society where you have this issue, and we're just making this issue worse by bringing in even more racially alien, you know, Hispanics, mestizos from Latin America, and Asians, and everyone is just losing their sense of identity and being, you know, atomized and alienated from society. So I think that's kind of like roughly what we should be talking about here, is, you know, explain to them what the problem is and the solution, or is a more cohesive society, right? And then if you want to, you can talk about how would we create a more cohesive society, a more unified society, right? Along identitarian or nationalist lines. So, yeah, I mean, that's kind of my general recommendation.
Great. We have Whiskey Tango Foxtrot from Texas asking, in your opinion, what is the single most important topic to be used when attempting to red pill the unwashed masses?
Wow. In my opinion, the single most, for me, like, okay, so personally, I've had the most success, and I was talking about social cohesion right now. I've had the most success talking about that because it's positive and not negative, right? So a lot of times, like, believe me, I'm from Metro Detroit. Like, the first thing I think of when I think of race, it's crime, right? It's crime, it's IQ, it's performance in schools, it's affirmative action, things like that. And like that stuff, like it pisses me off. Now, those can all be important topics in their own right to talk about, right? But I prefer, I think generally speaking, especially like when you're first talking with someone about this, it's better to talk about like cohesion and like a feeling of being part of something greater, right? And so that's kind of what I prefer to talk about. And there's a lot of science behind it as well, where you can say like, look, I mean, Robert Putnam wrote about it in Bowling Alone. How so-called diversity, ethnic diversity, actually ruins our cohesion. And here's the real world issues that come from that, right? Less people donate to charity. People don't want to pay taxes. They don't feel a sense of community. And you can sell them like, you'd have a greater sense of community. You wouldn't feel as alienated. You wouldn't feel like after work you just have to go home and watch TV or play video games every night or whatever if you lived in a society like Denmark, for example, right? You'd be happier. Like people are happier in societies that are more cohesive, more homogeneous. So that's kind of what I try to talk about. The other stuff, I mean, it can be important to bring up in specific discussions. Like if someone talks about Black Lives Matter, then yeah, like you're going to have to bring up black crime rates and disparities, and maybe all these people are getting shot in the streets because they're committing crimes, right? Or if someone talks about like discrimination in schools, well, you're going to have to bring up like the IQ differences, because that explains the difference in school performance, right, and academic achievement. And bring up affirmative action, like it's hurting whites, like it's so-called reverse discrimination. It's discrimination against whites. So it kind of depends, but yeah, my main selling point is the cohesion. I was trying to like sell a positive message instead of a negative message. I rather bring ourselves up instead of knocking other people down, unless the conversation veers in a different way. So.
Yep, I can't find anything I've disagreed with that you've said so far. I don't know. This might be boring that we're on the same page, but we're on the same page about nearly everything. Evan from Colorado asks, my question is, what are the best times and methods to red pill friends and peers? Well, dude, the best times are you just have to play it by ear. I mean, honestly, it's when they're ready. I don't think it should be anything that should be forced. I don't know if you want to go into methods. I mean, times, that's just a very, very difficult question to answer. But I don't know if you want to go into methods there, Alex.
Yeah, I mean, I think we kind of like discussed a lot of it now. Like times, like it depends. Like you said, played by ear. But sometimes if someone's open to like talking with you and they're like a close family member that loves you and is not going to like hate you for saying something, you can like gently bring up a topic. And like, so I mean, I'll give you an example. So the community, I live in a suburb, right? And the suburb's like 95% white. But recently that's been changing just a little bit. But it's like all the McDonald's all the McDonald's next to my house, they used to be like the staff used to be like all white, right? And that's changed. And as a result, the quality of the food has dropped incredibly. And whereas you used to go through the drive-through line in like a few minutes, now it's like 10, 15 minutes. Like they'll ask you to pull up and wait, and then you get cold food, and it's like, and so like I've brought this up, like a huge part of getting red pilled is just noticing things, right? It's a huge part about getting red pilled on, the JQ is noticing things in the media, who the people are in the media, or who the people are pushing wars, etc. Right? A huge part about noticing or getting red pilled on race generally is just noticing things. Like, so bring it up when something happens that's relevant, right? When there's a crime or whatever in your neighborhood, like, a lot of times you can kind of guess who the criminal is, like what their race and their ethnicity is going to be. So you can point that out and be like, oh, look at this again, and just bring it up gently, and you can kind of, gauge their reaction, and depending on what that is, you can go from there.
Yep, totally agree. Okay, we've got just a few more here. Short Pants, I don't still entirely understand your question even after I asked you to rephrase it, so I'm just going to do my best here. In a recent talk at UA, a gentleman brought up the issue of translating the alt-right into the real world. How would you address this? And I asked him to expand on it, and he said, so the memes, the way our culture works online and on board. So I think he means that we've been very successful online, and we've hit some speed bumps in the real world. So how can we, as I guess we're sort of a little bit different than the alt-right at this point. We're sort of evolved.
Yeah, well,
how can we bring these ideas into the real world? I believe that's what he's trying to ask.
Yeah, I think what IE is doing right now is the right track, essentially, which is like you have rallies and events that you control, right? And in this case, it's very important to control the messaging that you put forth at your own rallies. And so here's the thing that people kind of got to remember is that any true grassroots movement, you're going to have a cross-section of society that's involved in it, right? So you're going to have all types of people, and it's very difficult to actually, control a grassroots movement in the way that you want it to. And so, like, in the Ron Paul and the Liberty movement, like, the issue we had early on was, like, you have a rally or something, media comes up, and they ask a guy something, and that guy, all he wants to talk about is 9/11 truth, right? And he wants to talk about how 9/11 was an inside job or whatever. And it's like, your rally is about the Iraq war, or like the Federal Reserve or whatever, like taxes, who knows? It's a completely other topic. But that guy just talks about 9/11 truth. So the question is essentially like, how do you control people that take you off message and lead you in directions that you don't want to be led? And so I think the way IE is doing it, which is like you have controlled rallies, right? You have a well-disciplined organization, right? I think that's the way to go forward, at least for now, until this thing is maybe a little more mainstreamed, and then you can, start trying more and more like public events. But yeah, I mean, it's just important to have a disciplined organization and to be in control of the message at all times. So like, when you organize a rally or something, if you have someone who's like new and not very experienced, let them know like, hey, this is the designated PR person. If someone walks up with a question, just direct them to this individual right here, and to the PR person. So you can be sure to control the message. There's other things as well, like you can make homemade signs at home, like you and the other core activists or leaders of a local group, and then distribute it to everyone who shows up at a small event or rally, right? So you control what goes on those signs. And yeah, just other creative ideas like that. But the other thing is just going to be holding more activism events, right? And eventually it's going to have to, like, people are going to have to be willing eventually to like go out there, fly or do something along those lines, and actually engage people face to face, because that's the most powerful way that any individual can, engage other individuals on an issue and convince them is, show your face, show you're a normal person, a human being, you're, not hateful or anything. You just want what's best for your people and talk to them. Now, obviously, that's not for everyone, because people have jobs and stuff that they could lose. But for the brave few, they're going to have to start doing this. But it's extremely important that those people are, know messaging, right? They know to stick to their talking points, to the top of the Leesburg grid. And yeah, so that's that. But basically, what I'm saying is, IE is going in the right direction, and I think everything else is just, as the organization grows and the movement grows, it's just going to kind of come naturally. So, and yeah, I mean, I hope to hold more webinars and whatnot to help people. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be you guys working on the ground level that's going to grow this thing. So.
Okay, that's great. Actually, short pants, I haven't seen that. I'm going to mark that for myself later. Should be interesting. I think we answered your question though, how you wanted. Did you work for Ron Paul's campaign there, Alex?
I didn't work for Ron Paul's campaign. I volunteered for it.
Did you? Okay, yeah, I did as well. So I guess we're just into a few personal questions here. Well, Greg's asking, we can answer this one real quickly. I don't know if we've discussed this. Is the webinar video or audio going to be available after it's over? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. This is going to be available for a little while, I think. I'll keep this up for a few days and probably take it down. At this link, it's, what's it called? Like, you can only access this video through the link that was provided, so make sure to save it. And if you want,
it's a private link. It's in announcements, guys. We're going to keep it in announcements for, let's say, a week or so before we take it down. Yeah. Actually, after this is over as well, server admin, if you want to perhaps make it so that nobody can post in this chat, but leave the seminar chat up for like just 3 or 4 days so people can skim through it and bookmark resources as necessary. Oh, Greg was wondering what years, which campaign years you volunteered for Ron Paul's campaign there, Alex.
I volunteered in 2012. In 2008, actually, I didn't volunteer for his campaign. I believe this or not, I volunteered for the Michigan Libertarian Party because I was too young to vote in the primary, and then my birthday happened after the primary, by which point, Ron Paul wasn't running in the general. So I decided to volunteer for the Michigan Libertarian Party. I decided they're all kooks and fucking idiots and crazy and whatnot. So then I started doing some volunteering for Campaign for Liberty, and that, which was Ron Paul's nonprofit, his 501c4. And then in 2012, I was, by 2011, I was already knocking on doors for Ron Paul and the Michigan winner and everything, IDing voters and talking to them. And from there, I kind of ended up, volunteering for a congressional campaign, then working for state rep campaign, and working for a referendum ballot issue, and working for nonprofits, and kind of took off from there. So
yeah, I was never that involved. I just did phone banking.
Nice.
So yeah, these are a little bit lighter to end things off with, which I think is good. What's I'm not going to say that, Greg. What's your biggest white pill last year, and did you ever struggle with being black pilled?
Well, yeah, I mean, I did struggle with being black pilled because I was fired after Charlottesville, so that kind of sucked, and I didn't even go. Right, like it's just like they just freaked out, and they're like, "This guy's too far right wing, cut him." But like, so that kind of black pilled me. But my biggest white pill last year. I know that, like, this isn't going to be big for other people, but it was just like, because my main issue when I was like a libertarian and everything was just non-intervention, anti-war, and just seeing that, you know, the only people that did an anti-war rally were the alt-right after the Syria strikes. The only people who were serious about that were the alt-right. The alt-right didn't do anything. You know, Posobiec, he ended up holding a rally around the same time, which was like 5 people showed up. And it wasn't even about that. It wasn't about the Syria strikes. It was about like keeping Steve Bannon in the administration. And I was like, all right, like maybe that's worthwhile, maybe not. But like the main issue here is the Syria strikes. It's keeping Trump's feet to the fire on this issue, making sure he doesn't go full neocon on us, and just like seeing, you know, the alt-right show up on that. So on that issue, so that was like big for 2017 for me, in terms of like a white pill. And I think, you know, after kind of like Charlottesville and everything, going through a bit of a rough patch, but I think right now, overall, like this kind of populist nationalist right wing, I think it's starting to get its shit together, you know. And I think, you know, with the whole what's happening in Syria right now, with the wall, with the caravan, people are starting to get united again. You know, with certain events essentially knocking out the people that I think are undisciplined. You know, the organizations that I think are undisciplined and bad with messaging and everything. I think essentially we're kind of in a good position to, you know, create a new movement or reset the direction and grow. And I think it's going to be a good year. It's going to be a good few years until, you know, 2024, maybe 2020, when we can kind of insert ourselves into the mainstream discourse again. But yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And to ad lib a famous quote, you know, the dissident right's going through a transformation, and IE is going to be central in that transformation. We're going to have a leading role, and without us, you know, the dissident right might not survive, right? Okay, that was a good question and a good answer. Jacob asks, will you be going public with your IE membership? We met way back in the day at AM First, by the way. Nice seeing you here. He's from Washington.
Oh, right on. Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't really care. I mean, my name's already out there. I'm not gonna work in politics again. So it's not like, whatever.
Yeah, I think he was just being considerate, you know, and letting other people know. Whether or not this could be shared information, obviously nobody really cares enough to put it on blast.
Yeah.
It's just wise to know if that's something that can be discussed or not.
I mean, I already have articles up on like Russia Insider and Fashion Nation talking about Jews. So like I'm not, you know, like I'm not hiding my views or anything. So
now on Russia Insider, you weren't the one who wrote that tremendously long, really fascinating read, were you?
About what?
About the history of Jews in Russia over time?
No, that wasn't me. That was the editor of Russia Insider.
Was it? Okay. Yeah, I never paid attention to who wrote it. I actually have to read that again because it was really, really, really comprehensive. It's a good read too. So it looks like this is going to be the last question here, guys. And I think it's a perfect final question. Greg from Texas asks, if you were a teacher and we were your students, what would our homework be? And that includes extra credit.
Yeah, no, my homework would be the Leesburg grid. Go with your local people, you know, maybe do a conference call or something, or if you can meet up, like next time you meet up, go and create your own Leesburg grid. This is a Leesburg grid is supposed to be a collaborative effort, right? So that's why, like, if you go to my YouTube page and find the 2 lectures that are about political messaging in the Leesburg grid, you'll see that it's interactive, right? And that's how it's supposed to be now. in this webinar format, I can't really do it interactively, so it's not as good as it can be. But if you can go with your local guys, do the Leesburg grid, and come back with something, hit me up on Discord or shoot me a DM on Twitter or something. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to help you out there. But yeah, I mean, that'd be your homework. Come back with something, and then you guys will know better what to talk about and what to not talk about, and how to not get pigeonholed into something that you should be talking about. Like, oh, okay, they're saying this. Let's just transition to the top of the Leesburg grid. Let's talk about defining ourselves, right? Let's talk about defining the enemy, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, I actually had those. Even before we started streaming, I looked up the videos in your channel. I wanted to see what else was on there. So I've already shared those resources in the Discord. People should have access to them. I don't think I'm going to listen to them tonight, but I'll probably listen to them the next day.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's 2 hours. By the way, funny story. Those 2 videos. The guy that teaches them is a Jew. Yeah, and get this. It's even funnier because it's so stereotypical. That guy, he does. He's like the chief of development, which is fundraising at the Leadership Institute. So
that makes sense. Well, I mean, we can certainly use his high Weibull IQ.
Yeah. Oh God.
We should be able to help us out there significantly. And,
yeah, but he's really good with the lecture. So.
Yeah, I'm interested in checking it out for sure. So yeah, folks, we're wrapping things up here. I really enjoyed this. I hope we're able to put these on in the future. I felt like I learned a lot. The messaging was very simple, but I saw people in the chat and predominantly the Discord already catching on to some of the techniques you were talking about, specifically with the elephant, and very articulately explaining to other people who came in late how to operate with framing in relation to the Leesburg grid. So I'll be looking forward to probably watching this a second time, or maybe listening to it as I work out and reviewing it. But yeah, this was great. Glad you're in IE. Glad you're able to help us out with that. And yeah, I don't know if you want to end the stream. Thanks for coming, guys.
All right, awesome. One last thing I'll point out: if you go to Amherst Media /tag/activism, I've got 3 articles up there on various things. One is like recruiting. If you guys ever go out there in public, I think maybe it's a little too early for I to engage in this, but that's out there. Entryism, how to infiltrate the mainstream. I think a lot of people might be interested in that. And the last article is designing activist literature that wins. Like, you can design literature at home, but make sure to keep it on message for whatever you call your local group or for IE. But yeah, just throwing that out there. Amherst Media /tag/activism, and you can read some of these things there. So, but yeah, in the meantime, I think that's it. So thanks, guys.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you.